Welcome to Secret Story. Brent's wife Julie was all excited. Last week, her Aunt Shelley had called to say that she would like to take a trip to visit them. Shelley was by definition Julie's aunt, but they were both the same age, which was now 39, and they grew up together as best friends. They hadn't seen each other in years and years, and it was going to be a little reunion for both of them. Today was Shelley's expected arrival. Brent was at work when Julie phoned to say that Shelley and Kimberly had arrived. Kimberly? Brent wondered, and then remembered. Shelley had a daughter before she was divorced. She would be a teenager now. Brent thought, this would be the Kimberly, great. He thought. He'd be stuck with two women sharing memories that he wouldn't know and a bratty teenage girl. This was going to be a great weekend. Brent worked until 9 p.m. and as requested came straight home after work. It was obvious as soon as he arrived home that there had been some celebrating going on. There were liquor bottles sitting out, and he could hear the women laughing loudly in the living room. To be hospitable, he poured himself a drink and followed the noise into the living room. Brent raised his glass and said, "Hello, ladies." "Hi, hun. This is my Aunt Shelley, and this is Kimberly." "Nice to meet both of you," Brent smiled as he came over to them. "Nice to be here," Shelley replied as she stood to give Brent a hug. Kimberly rose as well, but being only a teenager she seemed little reserved about giving Brent a hug. Brent was not about to let the opportunity pass, however, and raised his arms to her and felt her trim youthful body lightly press against his in a gentle hug. She maintained the hug a moment after Brent had released his arms, piquing his interest, and as she sat she smiled at him, the four of them, and chatted and snacked in the living room. Brent found it hard to not look longingly at Kimberly. Like most men, Brent loved the indescribable of a teenage girl. Again, like most men he pretended not to notice how they were. The more he drank, however, the more difficult it was not to stare at Kimberly. He knew if he stayed in this room someone would eventually catch on to his thoughts as his eyes were drawn to her constantly. Brent was having trouble keeping his mind on Julie and Shelley's conversation, especially when Kimberly was smiling at him with a smile that said, "We're together." Being left out, the two women were fully engaged reminiscing about old times. Kimberly and Brent were adding little to that conversation, so Brent started chatting more and more with Kimberly. Kimberly was becoming more comfortable and less shy with him now, no doubt helped by the few drinks her mom had let her have. "Does your mom let you drink often?" Brent asked. "You're not legal drinking age yet, are you?" "Well. No, I'm not. Almost, though. Mom does let me have some fun, though." Kimberly giggled as she took a sip. "That's good. A girl needs to have fun." Brent smiled at her. "How much fun does she let you have?" Julie and Shelley were deep in laughing conversation, not paying any attention to Brent and Kimberly. "Well," she grinned and looked coyly at Brent as she whispered, "not as much as I have without her knowing." "Oh, secrets. I love secrets." Brent spoke softly, leaning toward Kimberly as he glanced at the women still engrossed in their conversation. "Who knows about these secrets besides you? You must have told your best friend." "Teenage girls always tell their best friend everything, don't they?" "I haven't told my best friend about my most fun thing," Kimberly said with a smirk, her eyes dancing in excitement. "No. Why not? I thought girls tell their best friend everything." "Well, I don't think my best friend, Stacy, wouldn't be too happy with me about it," Kimberly said, smiling inwardly as she reflected on her most secret memory. "Have you told anyone?" "Nope," Kimberly replied with a cute little grin as she leaned close to Brent. "I can't." Intrigue," Brent whispered. "Now you really have my interest." "Have I?" She replied with a wink that it may have been the alcohol, or maybe the need to tell a virtual stranger, but Brent felt that Kimberly was near to confiding in him something she hadn't even told her best friend. As she sat close to him on the sofa his eyes discreetly glanced over her body as they talked. Julie and Shelley were still fully engrossed in conversation and paying little attention to Brent and Kimberly. They were likely happy that Brent and Kimberly were able to connect well enough to allow them to reminisce, when Julie brought out photo albums, she and Shelley moved to the dining room for better lighting, leaving Brent and Kimberly alone on the sofa in the living room. Brent leaned close to Kimberly. So, let me see if I have this straight. You have had some fun that you can't tell your best friend about. That's it, Kimberly admitted as she tried to look more mature by taking a long swallow of her drink. It must be related to her then. Did you kiss her boyfriend or something? Brent asked with a grin. Kimberly giggled, shook her head lightly and gave Brent a smile that said, if you only knew. She winked, and whispered, something like that. I knew it. Brent whispered excitedly that he wondered if she had done more than kiss this lucky kid. It was becoming obvious to Brent that Kimberly wasn't the reserved innocent little thing he had assumed, and it was making him horny as hell talking about intimate things with her. He was excited to pursue this conversation that he turned to look over his shoulder at the ladies chatting and giggling over the photos. Satisfied that they were not at all concerned about him and Kimberly, he quietly asked, did you kiss him more than once? Kimberly too looked over her shoulder at her mom and aunt, then leaned toward Brent and whispered in his ear. Do you promise not to tell? All he could do was nod his head. Kimberly spoke in a hushed tone, it wasn't my boyfriend, he's just a boy. With sparkles dancing in her eyes she continued in an excited whisper, it was his dad. She couldn't suppress her excitement as she sat back and studied Brent's face for a reaction. Brent's eyes grew wide as he considered what she had said. He adjusted his position on the sofa. At his movement Kimberly discreetly glanced down and smiled. She couldn't help but notice his discomfort. She had gotten a reaction. All right, Kimberly, a teenager, was still new to the empowerment that a girl has over a man. It was like a new and exciting drug to her. Her mere presence wielded an unparalleled power over this 40-year-old man. She had first discovered this power only a month ago with her friend's dad. He would do anything for her, all she had to do was tease him with her youthful, and he was putty in her hands. Shelley looked right into Brent's eyes. She looked Brent straight in the eye, then touched her tongue to her lips and smiled at him with a knowing beyond her years. She knew that her youthful had caused excitement in many men of all ages. She knew now that Brent was captivated in her presence and she could do or say almost anything and Brent would not balk or resist. She had this situation under her control and loved the excitement it gave her. Kimberly leaned close to his ear again, this time resting her hand on Brent's thigh as she did. She whispered, just so you know, I'm 18 as of last week, and as long as I could remember, I was not interested in mere boys. I've always been into more mature men. But it was more than a kiss with Mr. Ashton, Stacy's dad. She whispered. Kimberly smiled at Brent's expression of shock. As she turned to look at her mom and Brent's wife. He reflexively thrust against her hand. Brent was shocked but almost couldn't believe that this gorgeous teenage girl was so obviously horny for him. He was more than horny for her. I would love to feel this, she whispered. Here, both Kimberly and Brent listened to the sounds of the women in the other room, then they heard her mom and his wife coming back. Brent quickly tried to regain his composure. Kimberly immediately started talking about a friend's new car as if that had been their conversation. She was a natural. Brent subtly placed his hands across his. Julie said that there were plans for the day tomorrow, so they should turn in early tonight to get an early start on their day. Brent could not come up with a good excuse to stay up that wouldn't be suspicious, so he was forced to agree. As the women led down the hall to the bedrooms, Kimberly stepped in front of Brent. She wiggled her deliberately in front of him as she turned and winked just before she turned into the spare room where she and her mom were sleeping. Julie was asleep almost immediately after they went to bed. But Brent was far too horny to sleep. After his pulse returned to normal he quietly cleaned up then fell asleep trying to calculate how he could get into Kimberly's. The next day they woke early and after breakfast immediately jumped into Shelley's minivan for a drive to see the sights. Shelley asked Brent to drive as she was unfamiliar with the area. They went to all the tourist attractions and as they were out and about walking Kimberly would flash Brent a coy smile or quick wink piquing his interest constantly. She was wearing a short flower print skirt, it drove Brent crazy and she knew it. On one occasion as he watched her, she fell a step behind her mom and Julie looking over her shoulder she winked at him. That would be hard to explain, the day ran into the evening and they stopped touring long enough to have dinner. As they sat to eat, Kimberly deliberately seated herself across the table from her mom and beside Brent. Her eyes were focused on the conversation, not revealing her actions as she continued to tease Brent. She was making him nervous, but he could tell that she was loving being a tease to him in public. He knew that she knew, he was getting hard from her attention that he moved his chair closer to the table covered by the draped tablecloth. Kimberly too drew closer to the table, and with her eyes casually following the flow of conversation, she slid her hand under the tablecloth. He reached down and tried to remove Kimberly's hand lest she or they get caught. As they were close to finished eating, Kimberly excused herself to the washroom. When she returned, she discreetly laid a piece of paper on Brent's lap. He subtly looked down in his lap and read the note. It read, "Have another drink so you can't drive. Then you can ride in the back with me." Brent had been wondering how he could get her alone, and this may be the best chance for them. He was ready, Brent, as he looked to his wife and Kimberly's mom as they chatted. He discreetly placed his chin in the palm of his hand. Kimberly's aroma was on his fingers and he eagerly breathed it in. Brent smiled and glanced at Kimberly's cute face. She smiled and winked. The game was hers and she was in complete control. As she recommended, Brent ordered another drink for himself, and then another as they chatted. Julie, apparently caught up in the party atmosphere at the table, had a few drinks as well. By the time they were ready to go, Shelley said, "I better drive, you've had a few drinks." "Yes, I guess so, I think I'll nap anyway," Brent added, "I didn't sleep well last night." As they got up from the table, Kimberly maneuvered herself in front of Brent and behind her mom and Julie. It was well past sunset when they got into the van, and they were facing a 2-hour drive home. Julie sat up front with Shelley while Brent and Kimberly slid into the back. Brent took the very back bench seat and Kimberly sat on the bench seat between him and the front seats. As they started down the secondary highway home, Kimberly turned to Brent and put a finger over her lips in a SH sign. Julie and Shelley, never at a loss for words, chatted continuously. After a few minutes, Kimberly complained to her mom, "Mom, I'm trying to sleep right behind you, can you talk quietly?" Shelley played right into Kimberly's hand on the first try, "If we're too loud, move back a row, there's room back there with Brent." "Okay, I think he's already asleep, though." Kimberly got up from the seat she was in and came back to Brent's bench seat. It was almost completely dark in the back seat, and as Brent leaned with his back against the wall on the driver's side, Kimberly leaned with her back to the passenger side. Brent immediately heard Kimberly moving around while trying to be quiet about it. He tried to make out what she was doing, but could not see well enough. He knew shortly, though, when he felt her place something in his hand. Being as quiet and still as possible, with her mother and Brent's wife only a few feet away, the women apparently were running out of conversation, or were getting tired, as Julie was now leaning on the passenger door. She was at, or near, asleep. "Not yet," he whispered. "Oh please." She whispered back, unable to control her voice. Her whisper in such urgency was louder than she thought it would be. Her mom heard Kimberly's voice. "Is everything okay back there?" Yes. I just can't get comfortable," Kimberly replied. Brent, trying to appear asleep above the seats if Shelley was to look in the mirror, kept his back to the driver's side wall of the van as he slid his right leg to the back of the seat. His left leg ran down and off of the front of the seat with his foot on the floor. "Are you getting comfortable back there, Kimberly?" Shelley asked, making Brent and Kimberly jump. "You itch." Yes, good now." "Okay, we still have a way to go," her mom said. "Okay." Once Brent regained his senses, he could remember, he was immediately scared that they had been too loud. In seconds his mind went from intense passion to sudden paranoia. He was sure that he wasn't as quiet as he had intended to be. Had Shelley any idea? He knew it was very dark and they were hidden behind the seat, but people seem to have a sixth sense about this kind of thing, especially when it involves their children. He now kept as still as he could, as if to make up for their recent only partially controlled thrashing. He nervously looked toward the front of the van and saw that his wife was obviously sleeping, but Shelley appeared to be glancing repeatedly in the mirror. Brent was just about to move his hand when he was startled by Shelley's voice. "Julie. Julie." Shelley said in a hushed tone to see if she was awake. Brent froze. Had Shelley heard/saw them? Was she going to tell his wife? Brent's heart that had just slowed from his passion was now immediately racing. "I guess Julie is really tired," Shelley spoke, obviously aware that he or Kimberly were awake. Did she suspect? How obvious had they been? Brent was scared shitless. "Some people can sleep through anything," Shelley mused. "Oh shit," Brent's mind raced, "what does she mean? Did you not get comfortable, Kimberly? I heard you moving around quite a bit back there. It seems as if you were keeping Brent up too." "Up?" Brent considered, was that an intentional choice of words? "Yes, I did, Mom," Kimberly answered. "I feel much better now." Kimberly whispered, "Do you think she heard us?" Brent, starting to adjust his clothing, replied quietly, "I don't know." "You are if she tells Julie, that's for sure." Kimberly replied. "I don't think I'll be in too much trouble." "Really?" Brent answered, confused. "Yeah, when we went to bed last night, Mom confronted me about when you and I were on the sofa last night. You know, she asked me what we were up to." Brent was really confused now. And deathly afraid he was going to be in big trouble with Julie and Shelley. "What did you tell her?" Brent asked wide-eyed. "I told her pretty much everything, I guess," she said. "We talked for quite a while." He now was aware that Shelley had known all day. Why hadn't she told Julie about it? Was she waiting for me? Push Kimberly away, giving me the chance to redeem myself, Kimberly continued, "So when I told her that I was horny for you, she asked how you responded. I told her that you were obviously horny for me too. She understood that, telling me that she thought you were good looking too. She told me a little something else too." "What was that?" Brent asked, now really confused. "It seems that Julie slept with my dad just after Mom and Dad were married. Dad told Mom about it years later. It was one of the things that led to their divorce. Mom never forgot that and always swore that she'd get even someday. She told me that once she moved away, she didn't think she'd get the chance. But she did say that she had it in the back of her mind when we came to visit." Brent didn't know what to think or do now. He wondered if Shelley would tell Julie about Kimberly. Would she try to seduce him for revenge? She had told Kimberly she thought he was too. He was still afraid that Shelley would tell Julie. "She kinda gave me the okay to go after you actually. I could tell she was keeping Julie occupied today," Kimberly added with a light giggle. "I think she was kinda getting even with Julie through me, if you know what I mean." "I guess so," Brent replied. "Now that she's had her revenge, will she tell Julie about it?" "Maybe, maybe not. She may get personal satisfaction from just knowing. She may want to make Julie feel responsible, I don't know." Brent wasn't very confident that this little escapade was not going to blow up in his face when Shelley's voice came to them from the front seat. "Brent?" "Yes." He answered softly. "Can I ask you something?" Yes." "Sure," Brent replied, afraid of what she might ask. "It's just there is something interesting up here. Can you look at it for me?" "Okay, sure." He sure wasn't going to do anything to offend Shelley. She could bury him in one short conversation to Julie. "Do these gauges seem right to you?" Brent looked at the instrument cluster on the dash. Everything seemed to be fine to him. All the gauges showed the needle in the middle of the display. Shelley spoke again before he could answer. "I don't know if you can see from there, but this is showing something is getting quite hot," she said as she pointed to the temperature gauge which was right in the middle of its display. "I get the feeling that something in the van is overheated, or is it just me?" Brent now knew immediately what her game was. She was careful with her words so as to not let on to Julie if she awoke. Well, that looks hot all right," Brent carefully played along, not sure where this was leading. "Things started to heat up a while back, just after Kimberly went to the back seat. she added. Brent now understood it's been heated up before, but not for quite a while. I think it'll be okay until we get back to your place, but I thought that you'd like to know about it, Shelley said, turning to Brent with a wink and a smile. Brent heard Kimberly giggle softly behind him. They are in this together, he realized. Julie, awakened by the conversation, stirred, then spoke. Is everything okay? As she sat up looking at Brent. Yes, Shelley was concerned about the van overheating, but it will be alright, I think. It probably needs some service is all. Shelley added, yes, some service will help since it is still warmer than normal, but I'm sure we'll make it back to your place. Brent moved off of the floor to the seat beside Kimberly and extended his seat belt. As he reached for the buckle to do it up, he met Kimberly's hand. He looked at her, able to see now by the lights of the city. She looked gorgeous.